men are fighting for democracy. Since the war started, the word democracy has been used so much that perhaps we don't always think of the real meaning. Democracy, a simple word from the Greek. Demos, meaning people, and kratos, rule. Rule by the people. Most of us confuse democracy with the machinery that's been set up to work it, like parliament, local councils, and courts of justice. But the reality of democracy, its life, is made up of the everyday action of its citizens. In their homes, in the factories and places where they work, in their relations with their neighbors. Neighbors helping each other to help themselves, as in autumn 1940, when the air raids on England had started. George Roberts was working 70 hours a week in a war factory. Pretty soon, he decided that he was fed up with sitting every night listening to the drone of the bombers and waiting for something to drop. So he called a meeting of his neighbors and suggested that they organize themselves to fight any firebombs that fell in their street. They all agreed and volunteered to get other people nearby to help them. They clubbed together to buy stirrup pumps and got out a rota of duties so that someone was always on guard. So for the rest of the Blitz, the people of George Roberts' street were able to defend themselves and fight back. Thousands of other people were thinking and doing the same thing, and soon many of the streets of Britain had fire parties. The voluntary action of these citizens laid the basis for the compulsory fire watching scheme that was set up later by the government. But not all domestic problems are so spectacular. Mrs. Simmons's home was threatened not by enemy bombs, but by a hire purchase company.
Couldn't you let me have £1, Mrs. Simmons, on account?
I'm sorry, but I simply can't manage it. I'm even behind with the rent as it is.
In that case, Mrs. Simmons, I have to inform you the company does not intend to stand this any longer. You owe nearly 6 months' payments and have not paid anything for 9 weeks.
But after all, I've paid over £60.
I can't help that. Unless you pay off all your arrears within a week, the company will apply for an order and we shall repossess all the furniture before the end of the month. Good morning.
Mrs. Simmons was trying to keep her home together on her husband's army pay. Now she looked like losing the lot, unless she did something about it.
What's up, Len?
They're going to pinch the bloody furniture.
You're on the Never Never?
Yes.
Well, I thought there was a law or something to stop them doing that.
Well, it didn't stop them taking half my lot.
There is a law of some sort, but I don't know what it is. I know. What about this new Army Legal Department or whatever it is?
That's not a bad idea. But I wish there was somebody on the spot the wife could go to.
Hi, Professor. Hire purchase people are trying to pinch Len's furniture. Any place his missus could go to get some advice about it?
What about your solicitor? Well, don't be daft, we haven't got one.
Well, what about the police or your local parson?
What about the Citizens Advice Bureau? Or poor man's lawyer?
So Mrs. Simmons found out what her rights in the matter were.
Under the Hire Purchase Act of 1938, they can't take the furniture. If, as you say, you've paid for £60 worth, they must leave you at least that much.
But what about the rest of it?
I expect they'll take you to court on that. But in wartime, the court is usually very reluctant to make an order for repossession. If you make an offer of a small weekly payment, even of £1 or so a week, they're almost certain to approve it.
Well, thank you very much. But I don't know where I'm going to find the money from, I'm sure. I'm behind with the rent as it is.
Now remember, whatever happens, don't let them take the furniture, not even a bit of it.
Over my dead body.
When Mrs. Simmons went in, the court was dealing with a rent case.
Obviously, you can't pay 18 and 6 a week. I'll make an order for 10 shillings. Of course, you will still be liable to the landlord for the full rent which he will be able to obtain when you are in a position to pay. And if your circumstances change meanwhile, he can apply to have the order increased. All right, 10 shillings a week.
New Way Furnishing Company and Simmons.
the testament in the right hand and take the oath, please,
I
madam.
swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give to the court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Now, what are you asking for?
We want repossession of all the furniture, other than the £60 worth paid for. The contract is for £2 a month. There's nearly 6 months' payments owing and...
Yes, but this contract was entered into before the war. And I'm here to protect people whose circumstances have changed through war service. I certainly shan't grant repossession. Now, how much can you pay?
Well,
How much have you got coming in?
well, just the army allowance. 43 shillings a week for me and the 2 children.
Could you pay 2 shillings a week?
Yes.
Very well, 2 shillings a week. You realize, of course, if you don't keep up the payments, the company will have the right to proceed against you.
Oh, yes.
There was a law to protect Mrs. Simmons, but it would have been no help to her if she'd not set out to help herself. Now, here's Mrs. Lucas, whose rent case was heard in court just before Mrs. Simmons.
Well, I was a bit nervous at first, and I may say I didn't fancy the idea of being in court at all. But as soon as things got going, I didn't mind a bit. In fact, I really quite enjoyed it.
Well, how much do you have to pay out now, then?
Oh, 10 shillings a week. Though, of course, that's only till the end of the war. It'll certainly be a big help, though. What with everything going up and all we owe, I still don't see how we're going to manage. What with the insurances and things and a family growing up, I can't see how the government expects people like us to make do on a measly soldier's allowance.
Why, how much are you getting now, then?
Oh, just the same as anybody else, of course. 38 shillings for myself and 2 kiddies.
Oh, but we get more than that. We get 10 or 6 a week on top of that.
Why, how on earth do you get that?
Oh, it's something to do with a thing called war service grants or something like that. Harry saw his officer about it. We got it through without any trouble. We've been having it now for over a year.
Well, it sounds too much like charity to me.
Don't be silly, May. It's not charity at all. It's our money and we've as much right to it as we have to the dole after paying in year after year.
Well, how do you set about getting it?
I believe you can write to the pay people yourself about it. It don't do to be too shy about letting them know you exist, you know. When Harry was called up, I didn't get any allotment for 7 weeks. So I wrote to the War Office direct about it. They soon worked the others' ideas up for them.
I don't know. I'm not much of a hand at writing letters.
Well, then get Tom to see about it himself.
A war service grant, yes. What you have to do is to fill in form WSG21 and put that in. I say, Martin, let me have form WSG21 for Lucas, will you, please?
Very good, sir.
You know, you ought to stand a good chance of getting a grant. There's over 250,000 men have had them already. Here you are. Shall I give you a hand at filling it in?
Thanks very much, if you would, sir.
You know, a lot of men don't know about this grant. And there are others, too, like the maternity grant. 2 quid if the wife has a child. If only they'd go to the trouble of getting hold of the form and filling it up.
So the Lucases, too, made use of the official machinery and straightened out their troubles. If you're in difficulties, there are lots of public bodies from whom you can get help and advice. The town hall, for instance, deals with all sorts of things. You go there to register a pig club, to get a British restaurant set up, if there are enough of you, or to find yourself an allotment. The town hall and county court and war service grant are part of the machinery which has been set up to make democracy work for its citizens. There may be no official machinery to deal with all the problems, but that doesn't mean there's no solution for them. This is Mrs. Story, who worked out her problems with her neighbors. In autumn 1940, when some of her friends were blitzed and hers was the only house with the gas on, she started cooking meals for them at the same time as her own. Now she cooks for 12 people, all relatives or friends, and most of them out at work all day. They all give her their cooking fat coupons and half their meat coupons. With these, she can get a good joint that will make several meals. The other days, she makes up with unrationed meats, fish, cheese, or dried eggs. This way of cooking for a lot of people together is economical on fuel as well as on food. She manages so well that it all works out at 6p to 8p a head for a hot meal and a sweet. 6 months ago, Mrs. Story started work as a capstan operator in a war factory, and since then, her husband has been called up. She works from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. and then gets the meal ready for 6 o'clock in the evening. Mrs. Story solved the food problem for 12 people by working out her own scheme and getting on with it. This is the real meaning of democracy. People themselves taking the initiative. Today, when you see children at school with their well-brushed hair and clean, neat uniforms, it's difficult to imagine that less than 100 years ago, they were bought and sold as animals, forced at the age of 6 or 7 to work in coal mines or factories. The changeover was a long and bitter struggle, and it was democracy, ruled by the people instead of ruled by industrial exploitation, that won the day. Trade unions play an important part in peace and in war. Today, there are 7.5 million members and 1,033 separate unions. But a century ago, men were imprisoned and deported for trying to organize trade unions. Today, in a time of crisis, trade union leaders are members of the government. We take Parliament and women MPs and general elections for granted. But even the main principle of democracy, a secret vote for every man and woman, was only achieved by a bitter fight lasting right through the 19th century. Here at a meeting in Trafalgar Square, a woman member of Parliament is speaking. Yet only 25 years ago, people who said women ought to have the right to vote and stand for Parliament were denounced and laughed at, and their leaders put in prison. But they knew they were right and fought on. That is what democracy means, people taking the lead and backing their opinions with action. Today, we're a democracy at war. In other words, the people of Britain are at war. This doesn't only mean making weapons and fighting with them. It also means every man and woman taking an active part, both in the smaller personal things and in the wider national issues. The war will be won by ordinary people tackling all the problems and overcoming them. Peace will bring even more problems. What will it be like to work in Britain? What will living conditions be like? What sort of social services shall we have? These questions will be decided by people who think things out for themselves, who know what they want and go all out to get it. These are the people who will make victory and make it a stepping stone to a worthy peace.